Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good to see all of you here today. For those of you who may not know me, I'm Jeff Pittman. I'm Chancellor of St. Louis Community College. It's my absolute thrill and honor to welcome you here today. And thank you so much for accepting our invitation and attending this year's State of the St. Louis Workforce Report event, which, by the way, is our 17th year in running this. Yeah, let's give the... Thank you, and this applause is for all of the event planners to get it to this point, our partners and our sponsors. We thank you that we kept this running this long, and I can't believe this is my 11th event here. Thank you, which is next to commencement. It's my favorite event of the year, so I always look forward to seeing all of you. I was literally out of breath we were out kind of meeting everyone out in the hall earlier because I have got to know so many of you so well. And we just really appreciate your support of the college and everything that we have going on here. Well, you probably noticed some dust when you drove in. We have 2 new buildings that are now in place. We're renovating a lot of the different older buildings here. We're updating our athletic fields. And this is all a part of the support that the taxpayers had provided back in August of 2021 when all of you voted, hopefully all of you in the room voted yes for what we called Prop R, which was to expand career programs at St. Louis Community College. So thank you for that. Thank you for that support. Prop R has equated to 6 new buildings across the district. We call the effort STLCC Transformed. It has been truly transformational for us because we've been focused on high-need career programs in healthcare, IT, advanced manufacturing, financial services. On this campus in particular, horticulture. I hope all of you get the chance to see some of our new areas before you leave today or come back, and we'll be glad to give you a tour. But we're really expanding our training and education programs. And I want to thank in particular, we have a couple of trustees here. Dr. Craig Larson is our chair. Could you please stand? And Mary Lukey now is serving as vice chair. Could you please welcome them? And I call Joan McGivney our trustee emeritus. I saw her early. She keeps coming to these events. Joan, could you stand and wave wherever you are? We appreciate you being here today. Let's give her a round of applause. So I want to thank all of our faculty and staff and all of you for your continued support. I'd like to thank our workforce partners, including the Missouri Economic Research and Information Center, who produced the economic data for our report that you'll see here, as well as MoSource Link, who provided the data on startups and new job creation, something very important to all of us here at the college. I'd also like to thank the Missouri Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, and the Regional Business Council for their ongoing and support and partnership with this important event. Finally, I'd like to introduce one of our longest and closest partners in this effort, the St. Louis Business Journal, led by market president and publisher Robert Bobroff. Rob, can you come up?
Thank you, Dr. Pittman. Good morning, everyone. St. Louis Business Journal is proud to once again be partnering with the St. Louis Community College on this annual workforce event that is so important to our community. Jeff, congratulations on 17 years of doing this event. I'm not sure how long we've been partnering, but I've been here for 7 years, and we've partnered the entire 7 years we've been here. And so we are certainly proud to continue the relationship. This is always one of my favorite events of the year because workforce and workforce development are the backbone of business, and it's a topic that's obviously near and dear to us at the Business Journal. Earlier this year, on March 21st to be exact, St. Louis Business Journal published its annual Workforce Development Guide, and I'm proud to partner with the St. Louis Community College on that project as well. All 3 years that we've produced this workforce development guide, Jeff and his team have sponsored it, so thank you for that. That guide has been so successful that now 25 of our sister publications across the country do their own workforce development guide each year. St. Louis Community College should be commended for their continued efforts to move our region forward around this topic. And once again, Dr. Pittman, thank you for giving us an opportunity to be a part of today's program. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker for today's program. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Dr. DeAndre Braddix, who will be talking about Gen Z at work.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm excited and honored to serve as the opening act for today's event. And during our time together, we'll be talking about Generation Z. And to put it mildly, Gen Z is catching a lot of heat these days. From educators to employers, so many of us are struggling to understand this generation and to find ways to effectively support and engage with them. But it's essential that we better understand Gen Z because they're growing in mass in the workplace, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But what we know right now is globally, they are the largest generation, okay? So now is the time to lean in and understand the needs, the wants, the aspirations of this generation, and adapt our classrooms and workplaces accordingly, and if we're gonna be effective in terms of engaging with this group. So, there we go. So let's start by acknowledging the 6 different generations that exist, okay? And you have the 2 bookends, the silent generation, which would be your oldest generation, in which the youngest members are just now turning 80, to the far other end of that spectrum, which would be Gen Alpha, and the youngest members of Gen Alpha are the babies and infants, or babies and toddlers we see today. Sandwiched in between those 2 generations, okay, are the 4 generations we see in the workplace. Okay, your baby boomers, your Gen Xers, your millennials, and Gen Z. And each one of these generations have unique characteristics and qualities that we ascribe to them, generally based off of observations and surveys and research, et cetera. And when we do that, we paint with a very broad brush, okay? And so I need to give that disclaimer that as we talk about Gen Z today, these are broad brushstrokes, and there are always exceptions to the rule, okay? And to punch that point, I'm gonna share with you a few ways that we are sometimes reductive whenever we talk about different generations, okay? So for the baby boomers in the room, according to ChatGPT, you are loyal workaholics who can be resistant to change, okay? For our Gen Xers in the room, you are seen as adaptable problem solvers who can be resistant to collaboration. And for the millennials in the room, like myself, we are tech-savvy feedback seekers who may prioritize career advancement over loyalty. Ouch. So I am an elder millennial, and I will tell you that I reject the assertions made about me as I fall into that generation. In my 20-year career in higher education, I've only worked for 2 employers, okay? So I'm definitely not one of those people that are job hopping for career growth. So I ask you to hold that in mind as we talk about Gen Z today. All right. Oh, sorry, let me back up. So with baby boomers, keep in mind the youngest of them are just now hitting retirement age, okay? And with your Gen Z, we're starting to see them en masse in the workplace. And to that point, by 2030, 1/3 of the workforce will be comprised of Gen Z, about 50 million jobs. Couple that with millennials, that's 74% of the workforce by 2030. All right, so it's a little bleak out there according to employers, okay? So look at some of these headlines. Making sense of Gen Z's workplace nihilism. Ooh, very ominous, all right? US managers feel like babysitters to Gen Z staff. Ouch. Some Gen Z workers are quitting over the Sunday scaries. And if you don't know what the Sunday scaries are, that's when Sunday rolls around, Sunday evening in particular, and you start having that pit in your stomach about the work week ahead, okay? And then look at this, the Gen Z stare is real. Here's why employers should care. So the Gen Z stare is this blank, expressionless look that Gen Z gives when asked a question or in a social interaction, okay? And just by a round of applause, how many of you have experienced the Gen Z stare? I appreciate it. So that was not only a pulse survey, but that was also me as a millennial seeking your feedback, so thank you. I'm the proud parent of 3 Gen Zers, and I also have my niece who lives with me who's also Gen Z, and so I see this every single day. And many times I thought, oh, you just didn't hear me, so I'll repeat it. And then that Gen Z stare is just like, piercing into your soul, and you just kind of, I walk away. I just relent. But we can't in the workplace. We have to figure this out. So let's unpack Gen Z a little bit more. So Gen Z, born between 1997 and 2012, which puts them in the age range of 13 to 28, okay? And they are digital natives with strong tech fluency. And of course, we know this, okay? Many of us, we experienced emerging technology and adapt accordingly. But with Gen Z, they've had it since they were little. So think about this, the iPhone in 2007, okay, so that comes out. That's when Gen Zers were 10. We put handheld computers in their hands, okay? And then 3 years later, we added social media to those handheld computers. And so now Gen Zers went from their community being their classroom, their neighborhood, their local community, to this broader picture of statewide issues or national issues or even global issues. So we've expanded their sense of the world quite drastically. Then we have these other factors that have shaped their lived experiences. The 2008 recession, where they saw many hardworking Americans lose their jobs, lose their homes, okay? Many of which could have been their family members. Then you had the Occupy Wall Street movement. Then you had social activism, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, climate change activism. And then the COVID pandemic. And many of us probably grimace whenever we hear COVID. I know I do a bit. But think about COVID, not only how it impacted all of us in this room, but especially Gen Zers during those formative years, okay? Whether they were in school, in education being highly disruptive, virtual learning, which was in no means as rigorous as in-person learning at that time. I mean, my Gen Zers, when they were online learning during COVID, they were done probably within an hour of the school day, for the most part, okay? And then think about those Gen Zers that were new in the workforce when COVID hit. So they were just starting to build relationships, get in the groove of things, and they were, like the rest of us, working from home, working remotely, probably not building those same skills that we had the opportunity to build during that time. And now Gen Zers, like the rest of us, are facing this ongoing AI revolution, if you will, where we question whether or not some of us will have jobs in the future and what that will look like. And so there's a lot that Gen Z has experienced that shape how they see the world, how they see the workplace. Okay, so we're gonna start by talking about Gen Z and higher education. So we are fortunate that Gen Z, by and large, sees the value of higher education, okay? 83% of them understand that it's important. So we've done our jobs in terms of instilling that into them. However, Gen Zers are much more cognizant on the return on investment. And that's why you're seeing only 62 of them, 62%, actually pursuing traditional higher education. And so what you see, though, is you're seeing this emerging kind of alternative path for a lot of Gen Zers, which are vocational opportunities, apprenticeships, the trades. And that's because of the financial burden of traditional higher education. Within the last 12 years or so, your typical public four-year institution has raised the cost of the tuition by about 30%, okay? And think about this, you take out student loans, you start making those payments 6 months after graduation, when you're not making all that much money. Then you have all the reform that's happening with our student loan programs through the Department of Education, in which some people's loan repayments are doubling, okay? Gen Zers are very mindful of this. Oh, and so to that end, last year, the skilled trades, 25% of all new hires were Gen Zers. So you're starting to see that shift. They're looking for viable alternatives. They understand higher education is important, but it doesn't have to always occur in the college classroom. So for those Gen Zers that do pursue traditional education, higher education, here are some of the faculty experiences as reported in the Chronicle of Higher Education. Little reading occurs outside of the classroom. We know that attention spans have decreased substantially since COVID, unfortunately. Not exclusively, but unfortunately in some cases. There's a struggle with resiliency. So when Gen Zers face obstacles, barriers, how are they navigating through that? For those of you that don't work in higher education, you may not know that many institutions have adopted, it's like a social work model, if you will, of case management. And that's where we have multidisciplinary teams of folks across institutions across their institution that come together to support students of concern. So faculty in the classroom observe, that a student has, troubling behavior or is sleeping in class or is experiencing hunger or homelessness, et cetera. And we work together to support that student through graduation through a case management model. It is absolutely essential in today's higher education landscape that we offer that type of intentional support. But then we also have to think about what happens after that student crosses the stage of graduation and goes into the workplace when they face a barrier. Are there those same supports there? Okay. And what we also know is that students are questioning the why more so now for higher education than ever before. So when they are in a college classroom, they want to know, what is the utility in me learning this information? This was actually reported by a faculty member at Stanford who was appalled, being at Stanford, that a student asked, what is the purpose of this information that we're learning in class? Because 57% of students now see college as preparing them for a career, as opposed to 43% that see college as preparing them for life in general. There is this shift. And so it's considered student consumerism. They are consuming a product. That product is an education that should lead to a high-paying career. And so yes, so they seek out that education that they can practically apply. So what are some of the positives that faculty are seeing? So greater authenticity, okay? That's also part of that Gen Z stare. So people look at it as kind of twofold. So one end of the spectrum is Gen Z, because of COVID, they lack interpersonal skills, so they don't really know how to respond with that social, emotional intelligence. But then on the other end of it, it is seen as Gen Zers are just being authentic. So if, when I've been in front of classes before doing guest lecturing and I get that Gen Z stare, it's basically, they're like, well, look, I'm not really engaged in what you're saying, but I'm gonna try to be polite about it, so you're just gonna get a blank look. Yeah. And I don't know if this is always considered a positive, but they're more willing to question authority. I personally love that, but I could understand how some faculty would see that maybe as a negative, not always a positive. All right, so what are the ways that we're supporting Gen Z in higher education? Guided pathways. This is really big within community colleges, and also here at St. Louis Community College, we've adopted this model. And this model is where you realign course selection, okay, to kind of narrow that choice to ensure that a student can get to graduation faster and on time. But then you're also making sure that you center their goals around why they're pursuing their particular degree program, okay? So you're really trying to re-envision how students see college, narrow that path to graduation to ensure that they're graduating on time and with less debt. Then we have real world learning, and you're seeing this both in high schools and colleges, where you're providing that practical hands-on experience in the classroom. And that could either be part of a degree program or for a credential in and of itself that allows that student through an apprenticeship, an internship, project-based learning, et cetera, to go into the workforce with a credential in hand. And then you have NACE's career readiness competencies. NACE is the National Association of Colleges and Employers, okay? And what they do is we hear from employers of what they're looking for in terms of those soft skills from the employees that they're seeking to hire. And this is everything from teamwork, collaboration, critical thinking, communication, leadership. And we're working to embed that in classrooms through curriculum and project-based learning, service learning, but also in co-curricular opportunities for students in campus life, student activities, et cetera. All right, so now we're gonna get into Gen Z and the workforce, or in the workplace. And so these are key findings from Deloitte's 2025 Gen Z and Millennial Survey. And in this survey, and the reason I chose it, is that they surveyed 24,000 Gen Zers across 44 countries. And they've been doing this survey for 14 years. And so in terms of reliability, I feel like this is a really good instrument in survey data. And so here are the general findings that we're gonna dig into in just a second. Gen Zs are focused on learning and development. There is a rising sense of financial insecurity. They want purpose-driven work, and they also want mental health and well-being prioritized in the workplace. All right, so let's unpack that a little bit. Learning and development. So according to the survey, only 6% of Gen Zers are seeking leadership positions, okay? It's a little scary when you hear that. However, they are not lacking ambition. 7 in 10 of those Gen Zers are regularly pursuing advancement of their skills, their soft skills. And that's at least 2 to 3 days a week. Now, that might be through micro-learning, and so whether it be via Instagram or TikTok, they're watching different videos and counting that, I don't know. But it shows that they're not lacking ambition, that they want to actually learn and grow and develop as professionals. Unfortunately, we have some incongruence, though, in terms of the workplace. What we see is that Gen Zers think that their managers, one of their primary roles is to support them, mentor them, ensure appropriate work-life balance, okay? Unfortunately, when Deloitte surveys managers, they will tell you that 40% of their time is spent on administrative tasks, and that only leaves about 13% of their time focused on growing and developing their employees, okay? So you see that incongruence there. Then those same managers, 1/3 of which say that they don't feel prepared to be people leaders. And I think we've all experienced that before, where you see people in management positions and it's really more of a reflection of their time in the job and just kind of that natural growth, as opposed to them really knowing how to grow and develop people or lead people. And so it might sound a little hyperbolic, but I think it's fair to say that Gen Zers feel like they've been failed by managers by and large, hence the reason they don't seek leadership positions. They want to grow, they want to develop, but they haven't had the best role models based on their expectations versus what they're experiencing. And so here's a little anecdote that you might be able to read, but I'll just quickly read it. I've had managers who are solely focused on task completion without fostering any growth or innovation. My current leaders want us to try new things, take risks, and pursue learning opportunities, even if it means spending time away from our regular job duties. This supportive environment has been a game changer for my professional development. Financial security. So what we know now is that Gen Zers are struggling financially. 52% of them are living paycheck to paycheck, okay? 48% this year say they don't feel financially secure, as opposed to 30% last year, all right? 41% are worried about their ability to retire comfortably. Think about that, just put that into perspective. Not only are they dealing with the everyday stressors of life right now, they're projecting their concerns and worry 40 years ahead, okay? That's a lot on their shoulders in terms of stress. And even for those Gen Zers that feel financially secure, okay, 1/3 of them are struggling with the cost of living. 1/3 of those financially secure Gen Zers struggling with the cost of living. Think about this, for all of you that are homeowners in the room. Think about when you were able to purchase your first home relative to your first job, okay? And for me, I was able to purchase my first home within a year and a half of my first job. That is a pipe dream for many Gen Zers these days. Look at all the equity that most of us have in our homes now, okay? So just keep that in mind, that our lived experiences are so vastly different across generations, and especially for Gen Z and what they're experiencing. So purpose. So as I talked about before, Gen Zers are more connected to the global world than we've ever been before, okay? And they have this strong sense of purpose, okay? 89% consider a sense of purpose to be very or somewhat important to their job satisfaction and well-being, okay? 40% have rejected an assignment or a potential employer due to personal beliefs. They don't just want to be a worker bee. They have seen where that gets people. They want purpose-driven work. They want to know that their work matters, that what they're doing every day feeds in a positive way into the global world, okay? Or maybe even just in a smaller sense into their local community, their state, their region, but they just want to know that it has an impact and value. So here's an anecdote. To me, purpose at work means aligning my work with something meaningful beyond just a paycheck. It is about a job that makes a positive contribution to society and is about feeling a personal sense of fulfillment and satisfaction knowing that my work has a tangible impact. All right, so what else do we know about Gen Z? Mental well-being is extremely important to them. And mental well-being has a positive correlation or relationship to being recognized in the workplace. Okay, 61% who feel satisfied with work recognition report good mental well-being. Okay, on the flip side, 48% of Gen Z cite long hours and lack of recognition as contributing to a lot of the stress and anxiety they're experiencing. So like many of us, and this is pretty common across different generations, we want to be recognized for our work, but even more so with Gen Z. And so it's incumbent upon employers to be mindful of that if we're going to effectively engage with this group. So here is a little anecdote. I feel like the managers leading the team are very important to my mental health because they help control your workload. If they're giving you very tight deadlines, not being realistic, or not willing to work with you, that does impact mental health. You are more anxious about getting your stuff done on time so that the team doesn't fall down because you're late on your work. All right, and so what can we do to effectively support Gen Z in the workplace? So through all of those findings, what we've arrived at is the trifecta, okay? And that's the convergence of meaning, money, and well-being leading to happiness. So for learning and development, there's some creative things that we can do in terms of providing those professional development opportunities for Gen Z, okay? We can create in-house learning programs and allot time to work. It's very important that professional development not be penalized for professional development. For instance, yes, you can go ahead and do that activity, but your work is still going to be waiting for you whenever you get back, so you might have to stay later or do some work over the weekend. That's not what they're seeking. Mentoring opportunities would be very important for Gen Z. Even if you have the financial resources, learning platforms, or if you lack resources, maybe subscriptions to professional magazines or articles, et cetera, that could allow them to grow and develop as well. Whenever it comes to money, of course, market competitive salaries and benefits, yeah, I think that's a no-brainer. But financial literacy. I was very fortunate that when I was 22, I heard a knock on the door, answered the door, and it was a gentleman from Edward Jones asking me if I had retirement savings. And I was like, oh, I work in higher education, I have a pension. And he said, no, you need to make sure that you're doing something. And I'm like, well, I just started, I'm not making a lot, I can't really afford it. And he said, my kids are in the same boat. Even if you just start at $25, $30, $40 a month, it gets you in the game and it's really important. Those are conversations we can be having with Gen Zers. You know, financial literacy, many folks don't always have a full understanding of what that looks like and what that means. And that's something that employers can be mindful of in terms of supporting Gen Z. Supporting commuting costs. We're very fortunate to be in the St. Louis region where we have a robust public transit system. And we're also very fortunate to have an organization called Citizens for Modern Transit that I serve as the board chair of, in which we promote that public transit system because it's viable to the economic growth and development of this region. And so employers can definitely get in there and help support public transit, and many of which Gen Zers are relying on, not only because of cost, but also because they see great value in being responsible citizens in terms of climate change, et cetera, and protecting the environment. We can clearly define and communicate purpose. So again, purpose is very big for Gen Z. And so how do we connect what they're doing, okay, to the impact that it's making, whether it's locally or broader, okay? And the more that we can do that, the more value Gen Zers are going to see in their work, and the more likely you are to retain them. And then lastly, support work-life balance, identify stress drivers, and focus on employee recognition. So one example that I wanted to give you today, so a really good friend of mine works at a big employer here in town, and one thing that they do that I think is really creative and thoughtful for their employees is there are no meetings, generally, there are no meetings on Monday before 10 or on Friday after 2. Because let's be honest, who's really doing their best work Monday before 10 or Friday after 2? And it doesn't mean they're not working. They are working. They're just not required to meet during that time. And so that's a small kind of cultural kind of expectation or offering, if you will, that is very meaningful to those employees. And so that's an easy way that you could help with Gen Zers feeling that work-life balance that they're desperately seeking. And with that, I hope I have done my job in terms of getting you to hopefully rethink Gen Z and all the negative things that we hear about them. Again, as the father of 3 Gen Zers, I hope that you will be willing to hire Gen Zers because they will need jobs, they will be our coworkers, they will eventually be leaders within our organizations. And so now is the time for us to lean in, better understand this group. And it doesn't mean that we always have to relent and give in to every whim or aspect. In the news articles, there was a reference to Gen Zers demanding nap time and ping pong. What I hear is Gen Z are saying they want mental health and well-being to be centered in the workplace, but how we get there can be a negotiation and a conversation, okay? Thank you for your time this morning. Up my colleague, Phyllis Ellison.
Good morning. Okay, it's my favorite time of the year right here. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you to Dr. Braddix for sharing his thoughts on Gen Z. A lot of interesting perspectives for us all to take back to our jobs. We'll jump into things here. So I was writing this year's report, I kept coming across this quote, and it really stuck with me. The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but it will be those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And right now, I feel like with AI especially, we're all at this tipping point again of getting really uncomfortable, having to unlearn some things and certainly having to learn new things. So this was in the back of my mind as we were going through things this year. And as much as this is a change and a reality that we have to approach, we also have to think about how this translates through how we work with our workforce to get them here. We need all of our workers, and we don't need anyone left behind. So we're going to dive into the report this year. We have our 4 main sections: the St. Louis economy, touching on some of the traditional census data that we'll talk about. We have our employer survey, which is representative of the employers in our region and the feedback that they give about what's going on with their workforce. We'll have the spotlight on startups and job creation because we need new jobs to be filled regularly. And then we have our spotlight on transportation. Transportation is our focus industry this year. In addition to the general information, each year we try to focus specifically on one key area. And we're excited this year because this does tie into our new transportation building that we have on our Forest Park campus as well. As Dr. Pittman mentioned before, a big thank you to Merrick for their contribution of the data that you're going to be seeing here. Historically, this is just a baseline set here. I get kind of excited about charts and graphs, but I know not everyone does. This is just a baseline here, and it shows right now in the first quarter of 25, unemployment was sitting around 4.4%. The important takeaway here is for the St. Louis region, the St. Louis metropolitan statistical area, the 15 counties that make up our region, our unemployment rate tends to be a little bit lower than the state of Missouri, as well as lower than the national rate. It's good for us. It's also a little tough for our employers because it means we don't have as many workers available to be hired. Right now, the June and July numbers are showing unemployment rates running 3.9%, estimates up to about 4.2%. So we're still in that same range. The educational attainment of our population. I love this slide because it's so enlightening in terms of where we are today, in terms of our strengths, but also where our opportunities are for our workers. If you look at the left 2 sets of bars, this is our high school graduates and those that did not graduate from high school. It's about 31% of our workforce. The right 2 sets of bars show our workers that have bachelor's degree or higher. It's 39%, which is higher than both the state and the national rates, which is great for us because companies that are looking for a new home look at education rates for a region. The middle, those middle 2 sets of bars, is about 30%. And this is for workers that have some college, but less than a bachelor's degree. So associate's degree fit in there. We really have 3 buckets that are pretty equally sized. Our workforce in the region is 1.5 million workers. So you start dividing that into thirds, and there's about 500,000 workers in each of those categories. So we have 500,000 workers who have a high school degree or less in terms of their education. There's a big opportunity there to be training individuals and to look for opportunities that they could move into trades and other opportunities as well. The other way to look at this slide is to divide it down the middle. Our workers with a or an associate's degree or higher is 49% of our workforce. Our workforce with less than associate's degree is 51%. So we're really divided very equally there. And when we look at the impact of education, many of you have seen this slide before, there's a very strong tie historically. The more education you have, the lower unemployment you have in terms of your work opportunities. The more education you have, the higher the median earnings across every level. It makes a difference across your lifetime. But unemployment is not equal. It doesn't just fit neatly into our educational categories, unfortunately. It's different across demographics. It's different across men and women. It is different across our ages. The younger the worker, the higher the unemployment level. Males, especially young males, tend to have a higher unemployment rate, which you can see here on the slide. Additionally, you start looking into different areas of our workforce. For white Americans, unemployment is about 3.7%. For Black Americans, it's 7.2%. Asian Americans, 3.9%. Hispanic Americans, 5%. It's not the same for everyone. And then if you look at workers that might have a disability, 10% unemployment. We need all of our workers to be available in our workforce right now. And so as employers, we really need to be thinking about, are we opening up our recruitment channels and our opportunities to everyone? We're very fortunate here in the region when we look at the number of industries that we have. Our top 10 industries cover about 85% of our workers. We have a very diversified economy here with a number of industries. We're fortunate with that. If there's a shift or a downturn in one industry, you have other industries that are probably stronger during that time frame, and our workers can adjust and find other opportunities. Not every region is fortunate to have that. So as I mentioned, we have about 1.5 million workers. With the unemployment rate we have now, about 1.25 million workers exist in these 10 industries. Healthcare and social services has been our top employer for a number of years. It kind of blows everything else out of the water here. They handle about 16% of our employed workers. And then even on our number 10 category, which is our industry spotlight, transportation, warehousing, and utilities employ about 5% of workers in the region. Next, we're going to move on to our employer survey. It's always fascinating to see what the responses are each year. This survey is representative of the region. The organization we work with to conduct the surveys is looking at the size of company, the industries that they're in, so it's representative of the employers here in the region. It's a live interview on the phone. It takes about 20 minutes, and the survey is conducted with over 600 employers in the region. It's 26 questions. Some of those have multiple parts. We've used some questions for all 17 years of the survey, and we're able to track trends over time. Additionally, we look at trends that are happening today. And so we have asked some additional new questions, which are interesting to see what the responses are on those. New questions looked at trends including artificial intelligence, AI, training, and skills-based hiring. I'm going to go through some of these slides kind of quickly. So I want to just talk real quickly about the bars that you're going to see and why we picked these years. 2025, it's the current year. You want to see what's happening. 2024, the navy bar below it. It's last year. You want to see a comparison. 2021, that was the first full year of the pandemic, and we certainly saw major shifts during that time. 2019, the full year before the pandemic, so we have a comparison there. And then looking back at 2013, we're looking back over a decade ago, and we can see longer-term trends. One of the questions that we've done in the survey every year is asking our employers about the changes in employment that they've seen over the last 12 months. What happened over the last year? 21% of the companies hired. That's compared to 28% that were hiring last year. 9% cut employees last year. And in last year's survey, 15% had been letting people go. And what they reported during the pandemic, that was up at 31%. So we're in much better shape right now. Interestingly, one of the bigger spots here is 70%, a big jump of the employers are not making any changes. Talk about that more in a moment. Some other trends that relate to this, 41, in terms of hiring and trying to attract workers, one of the survey questions asked about incentives, 41% of employers are still offering increased wages. However, that's down significantly from last year's survey, in which 66% of workers were offering higher wages. Another interesting trend, this year's survey indicated that almost twice as many employers are hiring workers from outside the US than in last year's survey. And that's something I really didn't expect to see. Next, we look forward. What's the forecast? How are these employers feeling about hiring for next year? It's also kind of a pulse check of how positive they're feeling about their work environment and is their company growing. 26% expect to hire in the next year. Last year's survey indicated 43% were expecting to hire, so not quite as positive as they were last year. And we're back again to how many are staying in the same spot. 70%. It's a huge, huge number. It could be that companies are happy, they're content with where they are and the number of employees that they have, but it probably means they aren't necessarily growing. Could also mean that with the uncertainty that we have in the economy right now, people are just pausing. Employers don't know what's coming. Are they going to grow? Are they going to see revenue shrink? They're not sure. And I think this is probably leaning more towards a pause, that they just don't know what direction they're going in the next year. Next, we'll look at barriers to growth, another question that we ask every year. Shortage of workers has remained the top barrier every year for at least the last 12 years. This is looking at, can companies grow? If they don't have the workers they need, they're not going to be able to grow as much as they would like to. The economic conditions and government policies shift over time. I was actually rather surprised at these results because this is some of the lowest reactions that we've had in terms of companies being concerned about economic situation and government policies. I was a bit surprised that it wasn't a bigger factor this year. The bottom two factors are, again, a company's view of will it affect their growth, and that is employees' lack of access to transportation and the employees' lack of access to childcare. Over time, I'm always a little surprised that this isn't a bigger factor. But again, this is looking at it from the company's point of view, not from the employee's point of view. And my theory is if it's important on this level to the employers, it's probably 3 times that of a concern to the employees. If we look at childcare alone, from 2029 to 2022, 18% of Missouri's childcare workforce disappeared. We're down almost 20% in terms of childcare workers. That's a bigger drop than the 8 surrounding states for Missouri. If you're looking for center-based care for an infant, runs about $10,000 a year. At the median wages here in Missouri, that's 15% of your income for one child in infant care. If you're talking about someone below median wages, perhaps a single parent, you're talking about an even larger chunk of their income. For Missouri, 32% of our workforce lives in a childcare desert where you have very few options. It's hard to get people to work whenever you are worried about taking care of your child. Over 60% of parents have reported that they have no formal childcare arrangements and they are juggling childcare across two parents or with relatives. That leaves a lot of uncertainty, and a sick kid can suddenly change things in a heartbeat whenever you can't rely or you don't have a backup plan. Next, we're going to look at 3 different categories of skills and how our employers are viewing their skill needs. High skill refers to work that would require a 4-year degree or higher. Middle skill work would be some level of education, but less than a bachelor's degree. And low skill would refer to work requiring a high school diploma or less. We look across these 8 functional areas. You can see it varies dramatically where these needs are. And year to year, it shifts a great deal as well. For high skill, almost said high school, for high skill work, the areas that saw the biggest increase this year over last were business management, skilled trades, and patient care. All of those were up over 10% over last year. When we look at middle skills, that blue bar in the middle, skilled trades and manufacturing had increased needs of about 7% over last year. Business management, patient care, and customer service all dropped by over 10% compared to last year. Excuse me. And for the low-skilled jobs, the largest changes included skilled trades dropping by 15% in terms of their needs for low skill, patient care dropping by 6%, and IT and customer service both increasing by about 8%. So we see a lot of change. The one takeaway I'd love for you to remember on this is that blue bar in the middle skill. Some training or education, but not requiring a 4-year degree. Our employers have significant needs. Almost every functional area is over 40% in terms of their needs that we could get people into with some training and not a 4-year degree. The current partnerships to source talent for our employers. This has been fascinating to watch the last several years. If you go back 4 years ago, 4-year colleges were the number one and had been number one partnership and had been for several years. That was the go-to. Now that's ranking as number 5. Training institutions took over the first place this year, dropping nonprofit organizations to the number 2 spot. 2-year colleges jumped from the 5 spot last year, and the K-12 school districts and 4-year universities are coming in those 4th and 5th spot. Overall, this year, the companies surveyed are using all of these resources less than they did last year. There was a drop in usage in terms of partnerships in all of these categories. Now we're going to get into some of the trends. We've been tracking remote work since the pandemic. It's certainly been a big swing over time, and it's settled really into place a little bit more than I expected to. We've been referring to it as work from home, WFH, we all refer to that. And this last year, it's really been RTO, return to office. And so what we've seen this year is continued, we hear about it in the news certainly, a lot of big employers have required workers to go back to the office 5 days a week. What we've seen in our survey here, it stayed about the same between last year and this year, with 83% of the the employers in the survey reporting that their workers are back 5 days a week in the office. The second from the bottom set of bars there, we have about 8% of our companies reporting being fully remote, that everyone's remote, and then you have a mix in between of people coming in 1, 2, 3 days. A very interesting article that was just published in May by a researcher out of Stanford, was looking at the companies that had returned workers back 5 days a week. The policy is 5 days a week. The reality is, when they were looking at security swipe-ins, that it's really more of probably 3 days in the office, 2 days at home still. So policy and reality are not necessarily the same thing these days. So interesting trend. We've been looking at employer training. Employers committing training for their employees. It goes back to employees feeling like they're valued, employees feeling like they have an opportunity for growth in their skills and within that company. It goes towards retention at a time when companies are desperately seeking workers. Why not keep the ones that you have? The results continue to be vastly interesting to me. In this year's survey, 42% of the employer survey do not spend any money on training for their employees. An additional 28% spend less than $500 per employee on training. If you've bought training lately, that doesn't get you very far. I was really surprised at the results. We have another 30% that are spending $500 or more, but still, that's really leaving a lot of folks in a position where they have to either take care of their own education or they don't bother with new skills. It's really unclear where this is coming from, whether employers are taking funds and investing into automation and other forms of efficiencies in their company, or if it is perhaps pausing on cash expenditures right now because of that uncertainty of where are things going to be due to interest rates, inflation, tariffs, what's the revenue going to look like? And so right now they're not spending money on training. Our next question deals with skills-based hiring. This goes to the core of rather than hiring based on degrees, are you hiring looking for the exact experience, credentials, and skills that you need rather than worrying about a worker having a bachelor's degree or a master's or a specific degree. 26% of the companies have already transitioned to skills-based hiring. 65% are not considering it at all in the short term. So we have a lot of companies that are still working off of the same hiring methodology that they have been. With continued low unemployment, this surprises me though, because I really would think that companies would start looking for different ways to hire and being more focused on skills and the experience rather than focusing on the degrees. We've seen in the past that sometimes companies are committed, and from the highest levels, they say, yes, we want to be hiring across all these different types of training. Doesn't matter what your degree is. And what they don't realize that over time they figure out that their algorithms, especially on the online platforms, are still geared to screen out people that don't have a certain degree. So companies really have to look at this holistically, and are the desired changes working their way through the system completely. The newest question we added this year was on AI. We're all feeling it. I know we are. Who's using it? When do we use it? What is this about? 35% of the companies are either using AI actively or piloting AI. Frankly, it was a little bit bigger the number than I was expecting. 65 are not using it at all at this stage of the game. And then we asked how they're using it. This to me was way more interesting. Customer service, 42% of the companies surveyed are using it in customer service. Business management, IT, maintenance. There's a lot of ways this is being used, and you look all the way down the line. It's a fascinating mix, and it's interesting to see in how many ways companies are using this, and this is an area that we'll continue to follow. Next, we're going to move into our spotlight on startups and the job creation. This is the 4th year that we've been able to report on the new jobs that startups bring to the region. Startups are the source of net new jobs, not just for St. Louis, but for our state and for our country. The Kauffman Foundation in Kansas City has done decades of work on this. We need new jobs. We need big companies too, but we have to start with little ones that can grow into those. The numbers you're going to see are looking at a really specific point in time. This is new companies that are hiring their first worker. So it's a single shot of the year in which this happens. If someone's a solo entrepreneur, they're doing things on their own, they're not counted here. If they're hiring contractors, it's not counted here. This is the moment in time in which a new company is hiring their first payrolled workers. This year was great to see. The St. Louis region added 15,612 new jobs by first-time startups, which is an increase of 34%. So we look at this next slide here, you'll understand why I'm excited about it, because last year was a big dip down. The blue line at the bottom is the number of startups. This year we're up to over 8,000. This is a single year. This is a single snapshot. It's not building on last year's. This is a single snapshot. And those 8,000 companies hired 15,600 workers in brand new created jobs that didn't exist a year ago. Said you can see the recovery from the dip. Last year that dip happened across the country. Quite possibly it's related to interest rates, it's related to inflation, and also a lot of the funding sources. The venture capital community responded because of those changes in interest rates and inflation as well. The rebound, fortunately, is also happening in St. Louis, in Missouri, and across the country. All across, we're seeing that return. And for us, these were record numbers, or close to record numbers, in terms of the number, excuse me, in terms of the number of new jobs. We know that for startups, they don't all succeed. It's unfortunate, but it's the reality. We see within a year of companies starting, about 20% of them will fail. Within 5 years, you have another 40% that will fail. We're going to lose those jobs. The good news is that the remaining companies continue to grow. They are continuing to build, grow, and replace the jobs of the companies that failed. So even though we've got that failure rate, we still come out ahead in the end. Over the last 10 years, the new startups in the region, you can see them added up here. And even when you start calculating the ones that have, the firms that have failed, they've added over 160,000 new jobs to our region. Every region would love to add 160,000 new jobs. We need this. When we look at the industries that these companies are focused in, they're pretty representative of our region. Healthcare, of course, it's our biggest employer. It also generates the biggest number of startups and the biggest number of jobs created by startups. Over the last decade, healthcare startups alone have added 50,000 brand new jobs to our region. The fourth category, professional, scientific, and technical, which is where a lot of our high-tech startups come from, has added over 10,000 new jobs to the region. Those jobs pay way more than the average, and those are important for us to have in our region. These numbers that I'm talking about are looking back at what happened in the last year, or what's happened in the last decade. Most importantly, though, we have to look ahead to the future. We have an opportunity in front of us here in the St. Louis region that none of us were expecting 8 months ago. We have layoffs happening in significant areas in large numbers right now. Researchers that were funded by NIH and other federal grants are finding themselves without jobs. Federal workers, the tech giants across the country are laying off IT workers. Defense, military, and related civilian positions also seeing cutbacks. These layoffs are happening to a group of workers who are more likely to start a business than the average worker. Scientists, STEM workers, creatives, these are all problem solvers. These are all people that create and build things. These are people that are mid-career. Big misconception in the startup world is that everyone is a 22-year-old Mark Zuckerberg hanging out in their dorm room creating startups. That's not the case. Most entrepreneurs are mid-career. They have experience, they have skills, they have an understanding of where the opportunities are in their industry. They see openings, they see gaps, and they could be in the position to start new companies. We have a couple instances in the region. Back in the 1990s, Boeing laid off a number of workers, a large number of workers, and out of that we saw that about 10% of those workers, all highly skilled and technical, started new companies. We move into the 2000s, Pfizer did some major cutbacks here. We also saw scientists that wanted to stay in the region and not move, and a number of them started new companies as well. We have an opportunity right now with people, if they don't get recruited to Europe and labs, to work with these individuals and help them start companies when they're inclined to do so. We have a bigger problem though. We don't have the infrastructure in place that we did pre-COVID to help support these entrepreneurs. In 2020, I-10, the IT Entrepreneur Network, for those of you who may have been around the startup community for a while, did a great map. I would show it to you right now, but there are 129 organizations on that map, and it would be an eye chart. So I will spare you that. There are 5 key areas though, and when we look at those 5 areas, they're not the same as they were in 2020. Funding and capital access. From accelerators through venture capital, 17% reduction in those organizations here in the region. Community resources and events. This is where people network, this is where they collaborate, this is where they get together. A 48% reduction. 48% of those organizations closed during COVID. Facilities, incubators, co-working spaces, co-lab spaces. There were 22 facilities before COVID, 9 of those have closed, 44%. Entrepreneurship education for our university-based programs, a huge support system in the network, in the region here. They not only serve their students, but most of them serve the broader community. There were 21 when we were back in 2020, 5 of them, 24% have shuttered. Technical training. We have to train people before they can get into jobs with startups, and eventually some of those people will start their own companies as well. For tech-driven entrepreneurship, skill building, areas like coding, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and geospatial are critical. For about 15% of those programs have closed since 2020. There's less damage here, but this may be the area that's most critical because we need people, we need the opportunity to train people with the skills for the changes that are coming. So in total, of 129 support organizations, 59 have closed completely or been restructured significantly. That's 46%. St. Louis does not have the capacity right now to support a major influx of entrepreneurs. This is the moment for St. Louis to re-engage. We have to build if we want the jobs of the future. We don't need to rebuild exactly what was lost. We need to learn from what we had. We need to figure out what worked and what didn't and what we need going forward. But we need a commitment from the community to grow the support organizations for our startups because it will affect our workforce and our jobs for decades to come. We need high growth, high tech startups. We also need traditional small businesses that are the fabric of our community. We need all types. I would challenge each of you and your organizations to consider what opportunity you have to affect a startup. It may be making an introduction. We do that really well here in St. Louis, the warm intro. We're good at that. Get people to a customer, get people to a resource that they need. Some of us also have the capacity to start new organizations, to fund these support areas, and to help build what could be incredibly transformative for a region. So I ask you to each consider how we can engage in that. We do a great job of recruiting large companies here in St. Louis, and we need that. We also need startups. It's an and, not an or. And we must invest in our entrepreneurship initiatives now, because 5 years from now, these startups will migrate to other cities. They'll be in Indy, they'll be in Cincinnati, Nashville, Chicago. We need that infrastructure here, and we all want these jobs here for our families, for our children and our grandchildren, and for the growth of our community. You can tell I'm a little passionate about that one. I will wrap up here with our spotlight on transportation and warehousing, our spotlight industry. I want to mention here that we are focused on transportation as the industry, not looking at passenger transportation and how we all get around as individuals. This is really looking at the business of transportation. Over the last decade, our transportation and warehousing jobs have increased by 24%. When we look at the range of industries again here in the region, transportation, warehousing, and utilities is our 10th largest industry. You can see again the increased growth there that we've experienced. Transportation here isn't a singular thing. We're really fortunate to have, we are known as a multimodal transportation hub. Love the language there. But that means that we have multiple types of transportation that come together here, and they're significant. We have airports. We have 2 cargo airports. Ports, we're the 4th largest inland port authority here in the, based here in the region. Our railways, all 6 Class 1 railways converge here in St. Louis. And finally, interstates. We have 4 interstates, 44, 55, 64, and 70. 3 of them will get you to the coast. To have all 4 of them connected here and as a spot of interchange for goods and services, it's significant. If we did not have it, we would have weaker industries in some of these other areas. Manufacturing, mining, and agriculture all rely on this significantly, and those industries in and of themselves are much larger employers, and it's based on the strength of our transportation. When we look at the subcategories within transportation and warehousing, you'll see that couriers and messengers increased significantly since 2014, over the last decade. Warehousing and storage as well. I think we've all maybe had a package or 2 delivered, so that's not a surprise. We also see that air, rail, and transit have all dropped slightly. I think there have been significant changes during the pandemic, but you also have efficiencies that have occurred during this time as well. Rather than me telling you more about statistics, we're going to transition to our panel discussion. We've got a great lineup of panelists here that are experts in this field and are going to share their thoughts with you. So I would invite them to the stage with Dr. Pittman. As we're wrapping this up, I have 2 things to remind you of. One, I've given you the highlights of the report. You haven't gotten everything. So please go on our website and check out the full report and download it. Also, as you step out today, you'll be able to grab the wrap from the Business Journal with highlights of today. Also, that little website address where you can download is available too. So make sure you grab that on the way out. And I welcome Dr. Pittman and our panelists to the stage. And thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Phyllis. Great presentation. You know, I'll say I love these little chats we have with the industry experts, and we utilize the report data. Many of the things that you're seeing right now going on with SDLCC Transformed, all these transformations occurring across the campus were based on the data from this report. So it's been helpful for us, you know, as a leader of a college, our trustees and our leadership team, to have these conversations to learn from you in regards to the great work that you do. Well, I'll get started out here with introductions. And as I introduce you, could you briefly tell us about yourself and your organization? So Mary Lamy of Bi-State Development, we'll start with you.
All right. Thank you, Chancellor, and thank you, Phyllis, for inviting the invitation to be part of today's program. So Mary Lamy, the Executive Vice President of Multimodal Enterprises with Bi-State Development, and I oversee the St. Louis Regional Freightway, and that's the hat I'm wearing today, but I also oversee the St. Louis Downtown Airport in Cahokia Heights, Illinois, the Gateway Arch riverboats in front of the Gateway Arch, and staff who works at the Gateway Arch.
All right, thanks, Mary. Rhonda Ham-Niebrugge with Lambert St. Louis International Airport.
Good morning, and
Welcome,
thank you. As you said, my name is Rhonda Ham-Niebrugge. I'm the director for St. Louis Lambert International Airport. I have been for the past 16 years in that position, almost 40 plus years in aviation. So my whole life has been spent in the aviation transportation sector. I think everybody knows that St. Louis Lambert is the largest airport in the state of Missouri and a significant economic engine to this state in this region.
You have a lot of exciting changes on the way.
We do. We do.
All right, Ron Hines with UPS.
Good morning and thank you. My name is Ron Hines. I'm Director of Operations for UPS, cover the pretty much the Midwest here with Illinois and Missouri. There's not much to say about UPS. I'm pretty certain you've all met us at least once within the past month or two. So thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Ron. Well, Phyllis already went through some of the statistics about how significant transportation, logistics, and utilities are. Those industries are critical to the success of the St. Louis region. I'm glad to say that last week we had the ribbon cutting for our Transportation Education Center at Forest Park. So we're so excited about getting that building open and getting underway, and hope that it helps with some of the workforce challenges and helping employers get the workers they need going forward in the future. So we're just going to basically be having an informal conversation up here. I'll ask a question. I'll ask one of you to lead, but the rest of you feel free to jump in and share your experiences as well. So Ron, we'll start with you. Are there any lasting impacts on the transportation workforce from the pandemic?
I'm going to say yes. The pandemic itself was probably for us the catalyst for a lot of online shipping, especially for those that have never even shipped before, shopped before. So now what's happening is that over time, not anyone's a novice anymore at shopping online. And what's happening is that now you have those that are in super rural or rural America. They're all continuing to shop and ship because it's convenient now. And even more important, those who are experts at shopping online and shipping, such as my wife, is still continuing to ship to this day.
Yeah, I think, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, Ron.
Yeah. I think for our industry, it was the brain drain that we saw from the pandemic. There were so many people who were eligible for retirement in our industry, and the pandemic drove them to retire a year or two earlier than they anticipated for lots of reasons, right? The health concerns, just the overall environment. So that brain drain has been a dramatic impact for us. And as we think about replacing that workforce that had so much knowledge and so much training, replacing that has been the biggest challenge that we as an industry have seen. So I would say for us, that lasting piece of the pandemic is something that's going to take a decade to overcome.
So you still feel like you're catching up? You got a ways to go.
Without a doubt.
Okay, Mary, any observations from you?
Yeah, I think starting with the trucking industry, it's been a roller coaster for them. During COVID, the manufacturing industry slowed down or stopped at times. Then all of a sudden, our purchasing behavior changed. and all of a sudden we're panic buying and we're doing e-commerce. And then there was this huge surge in the trucking industry. And then all these companies ramped up during that window of time. Then post-COVID, you still had all those companies out there. So you're almost saturated with the companies. You still had workforce issues, but you were saturated, but the profit margin wasn't quite as high. And I think we're finally starting to get past that point, and that part is balancing out at this point. I think they were predicting about 1.5% growth for trucking this year, but then moving forward, I think between now and 2035, it's anticipated the trucking industry will grow by about 18%, which is very good. For the rail and the barge, it's kind of interesting. For the barge industry during COVID, it was moderately impacted because if you think during that time, we weren't driving as much, we weren't flying as much. The manufacturing companies weren't making as many things that needed metal. Well, for the barge industry, they're moving petroleum products, they're moving coal, they're moving those metal products. And so there was a moderate hit with that. But for the St. Louis region, what's really interesting is because of all those modes of transportation that Phyllis had mentioned, that gives us the ability that we're moving lots of different commodities. So when it comes to those supply chain disruptions, the risk isn't quite as much. And so, yeah, some of the fuel, some of the metal, we weren't shipping out as much in the barge, but we're still moving a whole lot of grain out of this area.
Okay. All right, thank you. What are the biggest skill gaps you currently see in the transportation sector? Rhonda, I'll start with you.
Yeah, our two biggest skill gaps really are the facility maintenance workers, those that have, HVAC, engineering, all of the types of things to keep a facility like the airport running. I mean, we're, 200 million square feet. So we've got lots of square foot, and that's a challenge with finding the facility mechanics. I think the second piece of that would really be the workers that are 24/7. So the airfield maintenance workers, where you've got to keep the airfield lighting up. You've got to make sure that there's no holes in the fence. You've got to make sure that, the grass is mowed all the time. And so all of those little things that you don't think about as part of running an airport operation, but the teams to do that are large, and we are really having challenges trying to find enough workers to do both the facility side as well as the airfield side in the ongoing maintenance of both of those.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to follow up on Rhonda, and at some point I want to imagine Rhonda's going to talk about her new proposed terminal reconstruction project, and that's very significant. It's several $1 billion. She's wanting to do that in the next couple of years. At the same time, with the hat that I'm wearing, I'm trying to advocate for another $180 million of improvements to Interstate 70. So that means there's going to be a whole lot of work that's going to be under construction in the next 5 to 7 years at one location. So my concern is from a workforce perspective for construction. And then if you focus on the rail and the barge industries, they have a significant number of positions that coming out of high school, you can walk right in, and they provide that on-the-job training. So in the rail industry, it may be a switchman who helps coordinate trains moving through a rail yard. You could be a track laborer who's maintaining the tracks. You could be a welder. For the barge industry, it could be a deckhand, a mate. But here's the key to all of that. The good news is a lot of those jobs, you can walk straight out of high school. They'll provide the on-the-job training. Salaries are starting at $75,000, can go up to as much as $100,000 in a short period of time. But the challenge behind that is, and both the barge and the rail industry make it really clear, and that is for these jobs, we need people who are comfortable working outside. And in Missouri and in the Midwest, it's really hot in the summer, it's really cold. And when it's 0 degrees, they are moving trains, they are moving barges. The other thing is they make it really clear, and that is it is not a 9-to-5 job. You will work holidays, you will work the weekends, and you will work nights. And so that's part of the challenge as far as keeping up with the services that they provide now. And then we're also anticipating growth over the next couple of years, whether it's 5 or 10 years, and trying to meet what those demands are.
Wow.
Well, I can say with their growth, it's only going to benefit our growth being in the industry. We didn't find much of an issue as far as workforce gap. If anything, there's been an increase because a lot of our workforce is coming in as manual labor on the inside, on the small package side. The only thing you're going to have is probably maybe some CDL drivers, which there is, of course, here at St. Louis Community College, and diesel mechanics. So, but on our end, we've been hiring a lot on the small package side, which is the little brown trucks that you'll be seeing come to your residential locations. And for us, we've been swapping out all of our trucks from manual transmissions to automatic transmissions. So if anything, we've only increased our hiring pool.
Okay, I don't mean this to be a commercial break, but when you think about if there's opportunities for internship or apprenticeships with some of those jobs that you're talking about, the college would love to talk to you about that. That seems to be, that's a model that's growing in the college. I mean, it is significant with a lot of other industry right now, particularly with healthcare and manufacturing, that industry is working with us in new and improved ways. So we want to be as flexible with that as we can. Sorry, now back to our regular program.
Sales pitch, right?
Yeah. So thinking about economic trends in the last 18 months, higher interest rates, high inflation, tariffs, economic uncertainty, has that had an impact on the industry? Ron, we'll start with you.
Most definitely. Let's just say that trade moves with policy. And of course, tariffs and high interest rates generally is not very good for business on a whole. But as far as UPS is concerned, we, second quarter, Q2, we did take a slight dip in our largest and our most profitable lane, the China to USA lane. It's our most profitable one, but it just put a minor dent on our most global international profits and margins. So with that in mind, you got to say when you do have tariffs and policy change, trade doesn't stop. It just moves. So when you have the movement, right now UPS is highly positioned internationally, whereas right now we've doubled our capacity in our Europe and India lane and putting a new hub there, air hub in the Philippines. And so right now we're in the process of not just stopping trade, but moving it and virtually just opening the rest of the world to the rest of the world. That's what we're doing.
So, if we think about coming off of the pandemic and what happened last year, 2024 was the best year for St. Louis that we saw since 2003 in terms of passengers. We had 16 million people. So it was a really strong year, not just for St. Louis, but for the industry. And as we came off of that, and you saw some of the impact of the changes going on and the tariffs, as we got into the first quarter of this year, we did see that leisure market drop off in our industry. The business clientele has stayed strong. That need for the business opportunities and do the face-to-face and get back to doing business that people feel has a stronger connection with being, in person versus the remote has stayed strong. But that discretionary spending where people worry about what's happening with the economy, am I going to have my job in the next year, 6 months, or is my salary going to change? Are my benefits going to change? That discretionary spending starts weighing a little bit heavier on people. And that's where we've seen some of the drop off on the leisure side. For the first quarter, industry-wide, and we matched the industry, was about a 5% drop off of our passenger traffic versus last year. Again, most of that was leisure. The other interesting piece, if you see certain markets are heavily impacted, the Canadian market specifically, there's been a lot of angst with the Canadian market about the tariffs, and there's been a lot of reaction from the Canadian market for passengers coming into the U.S., not necessarily passengers going from the U.S. to the Canadian markets, whether that's business or leisure, but we've seen dramatic declines coming in from the Canadian markets, and we've seen flights pulled from the Canadian markets into the U.S. We're fortunate that we have both Montreal and Toronto, and neither one of those flights have been impacted. But we fully thought that we would have a good shot, perhaps, of adding another Canadian market this year. And that's put on hold right now, just as they determine, how much they want to support the U.S. On the European traffic, we really haven't seen a drop off. So I can't say that the tariffs or some of the economy has really impacted the European. Canadian's been the most, and then you've seen some lessening in the Asian markets as well.
Okay, thanks.
I was going to focus on when you have those economic fluctuations, it does impact trying to predict the cost of construction. So for manufacturing companies, a significant amount of their costs are transportation. So if they've got plans of trying to expand or bring a project to a region, it's hard to predict what that is. And the same thing would apply to the transportation industry. But another way of looking at this is when you have those fluctuations, you need to focus on how adaptable are you and what is your resiliency. And so for the St. Louis region, if I think of us like a bicycle wheel, and it represents all the modes of transportation, and we're that hub. The spokes are the 4 interstates coming in and out of the St. Louis region, the rail, the rivers, and all the flights coming in and out of the airport. And so what that does is it gives us some resiliency. It gives options to shippers. So if they are traditionally shipping corn and soybeans by truck to the St. Louis area, and something happens with fuel prices or they have a different customer, that spoke on that truck is going to come to our hub. And now it can take a different spoke, whether it's the barge or a rail corridor. So we've got that resiliency, which helps us out. And then I mentioned with the fact that we've got all of these different commodities that are moving in and out. So when you have those significant fluctuations, the hit isn't quite as significant because we're not completely reliant just on metals or the ag industry. And then the last thing I was going to mention is we have all these ecosystems when it comes to advanced manufacturing. One of them that we're very good at is the aerospace industry. Same story, and that is we've got a lot of diversity in the companies. Unlike some regions, we don't have just Boeing or just Gulfstream. We have Boeing, Gulfstream, and Westar. So that's where if one of those companies all of a sudden sees a decline, our ecosystem still is very robust because we've got all of these contractors, subcontractors, and these primary manufacturing companies in our area.
Thank you. And Mary, we'll start back with you again
Okay.
here. This is a 2-part question, thinking about the future. So over the next 5 to 10 years, what do you expect to be the most interesting trend in the industry and the most concerning trend?
I think the first one is obviously I'm going to focus on transportation, and that is right now we've got a number of really tremendous projects that are under construction. So MoDOT is investing over $2.8 billion on Interstate 70. We've got Ad Lane project on Interstate 55 in Jefferson County. And when you look at those projects and the new manufacturing that is coming to this area, a lot of those justifications are based on that close proximity to the infrastructure. So think about General Motors have spent almost $1 billion right on Interstate 70. American Food Group has spent $800,000 in Forrestal, Missouri. So these are the types of manufacturing companies that are coming to this area because of that infrastructure. And based on those improvements, I'm anticipating more coming to this area. The other thing I wanted to mention is now let's look to the future. In the aerospace and aviation industry, we will be experiencing $5 billion of infrastructure investment over the next 5 to 10 years. Part of it is the $3 billion St. Louis Lambert International Terminal project, but you also have Boeing investing $1.8 billion at their facility on the Missouri side, $200 million at Mid-America. That's going to create 900 jobs over the next 5 to 10 years. And when that happens, we're hoping that we're also going to be able to attract more of that industry to this area.
That's great.
And let's talk about the positive for UPS. I think one of the leading industries up there was healthcare. And right now, healthcare logistics is probably one of the highest growing segments in all 3 business segments of UPS. We're looking at roughly a $48 billion gap to address in healthcare logistics. And right now, I would say that in the St. Louis market, we're pretty much laser focused on being that #1 healthcare logistics provider in St. Louis. So if you want to look at trends going in the future, it perfectly aligns with healthcare and cold shipments, dry ice, anybody that's manufacturing dry ice, anything within that genre, healthcare logistics is going to be key for us.
Well, you've probably heard we have this little project going on at the airport. And the reason we embarked on that project was really twofold. When we did our master plan back in 2019, which we, after the pandemic, took a little bit longer, but we did it for 2 reasons. Those reasons being the aging infrastructure, but also the growth that we're seeing in our industry. And I think the world has changed where every sector of the population has the right to travel, and the way the industry has morphed, it's been given that right to travel. So we've seen all of these trends with the ultra low cost carriers coming in, traditionally Southwest, which had been known as a low cost carrier, and then the legacy carriers. So the opportunity of the traveler today is very widespread versus the way it was 2 or 3 or 4 decades ago. And that has allowed people to say, you know, let's take a weekend trip. Let's pack a backpack. I don't need to be first class. I don't need to care about my seat. I really don't even care, you know, where I'm at on the airplane or what the amenities are. I just want to go from A to B, right? And I want to go there safe and cheap. So that sector of opening up to the population is here to stay, I think. And people have come accustomed to it. And we believe, the industry believes, that that's just going to continue to grow. That desire, that need is going to continue. And the kids that are being born today, we heard a lot about the millennials and the next generation of the alphas. They're raising their families with children being exposed to different parts of the country and the world. And so we think that trend's going to continue. That's the positive side. And that's one of the reasons, as I said, we're embarking on this new multi-billion-dollar project at the airport. The flip side of that is the trends in the industry that are a little bit scary. And as we think about over the decades, when we used to have 10 or 12 legacy carriers in the days of Pan Am, Eastern, TWA, US Air, Republic, all of those various airlines, you now are down to 3 of the legacy carriers, which is United, American, and Delta. Southwest, which historically was that low-cost carrier that came in and changed the industry dramatic, you're seeing some morphing there, right? You're seeing their trends change. You're seeing, they now are going to a seat assignments, no more for the checked baggage. So what's that going to do for our industry? And then if you think about those ultra low-cost carriers, which really popped up in the last 10 to 15 years and expanded, they're struggling right now. They're struggling right now because of the price of labor, because of the price of fuel. And so that ultra low cost offering that's out there is really having to find its way of how do we compete in a market with our costs going like this. So I think that's the concerning trend, is just where is this industry going to go? And having been in it for 40 years and watching all of the changes that have taken place and where we were in the 60s versus where we are today, I do think this next decade is going to bring some more changes to that. We're just not sure exactly what yet.
All right.
I will say I didn't address the changes that are coming, and just as Rhonda did state, as we're looking at the Gen Z, Gen X, all the other gens and other alphabet you have out there, I think what you have is us. We have more of a gig working economy right now. You have several companies or startups, which we do want in the St. Louis area. There are several startups that want to get into the gig economy and taking packages from A to B, picking up from the airport, taking it to grandma's house. And what's happening is there's ebbs and flows in their business. Buying fuel and futures is a lot better than using your debit card buying fuel as you're delivering this package to the next location. So they may have some ins and outs or struggles facing with the tariffs and the fuel cost. But that's going to be probably the most challenging, is where the industry is going to morph and with how we're delivering. Everything isn't brick and mortar with, hey, I want the logistics department to ship everything to a mall. Everything's online. So will the industry change again? Will it continue to change? Yes. But I think as far as the challenges, it's going to be the gig economy.
Can I add one more thing to that?
Oh, sure.
I forgot to mention this, but you saw on the slide earlier, and I loved it when the doctor shared this slide about the workforce and the expectations and allowing your commuting workforce. That has been a big piece of this ultra low cost carrier world that we exist, because so many people during the pandemic moved to where they wanted to live. It wasn't because of they had to be in a location for their job, and they were allowed to commute for that job. Some of that world's changing, but it is another sector of the way we look at the growth of air traffic, is people living in locations but working in other locations and maybe traveling a day a week or twice a week or maybe twice a month or something to get to and from their work if it's a hybrid setup or if it's a remote work setup. So those are the types of trends that you see that are really changing the industry, and think about what's going to happen in this next decade.
Very good. So one final question, and we'll go to a little Q&A from the audience. But now's your chance. If you could speak to our governmental and civic leaders, what would you say? What one thing would you say about the future of transportation in St. Louis?
Okay, I'm going to go with this one. I'm going to focus on the St. Louis region, and that is, if you think about the infrastructure we have in place, we are responsible for moving the most ag and fertilizer products anywhere on the barge industry along the inland waterway system. So basically what we're saying is the St. Louis region has a very significant role with feeding the world. We're anticipating the world population is going to increase by 25% over the next 30 years, almost to $9 billion. We are in the center of the heartland. That bicycle wheel that I talked about, all those modes of transportation converge here in this area. We've actually branded ourselves as the agricultural coast of America. We're not necessarily a traditional ocean front, but we are a coastline for moving ag products through in and out of this area. And normally when we think about feeding the world, we're thinking in terms of production and the growth, but really we need to focus on the efficiency and how we're moving those products in and out of the nation. And for the St. Louis area, we're a leader with that. It is anticipated that because of that need in food, there is going to continue to be a tremendous growth in that industry. And that's why those shippers and carriers are taking advantage of the St. Louis region, that geographic advantage that we have. We are already seeing a lot of those barge operators investing significantly. So the rail and the barge do a better job of connectivity and moving the ag products and fertilizer from one mode to the other. So for the future, we're going to continue to grow in that industry.
I would agree. I think the future's strong. And I think, sometimes you have to lose your way to find the path forward. And I think there were a couple of decades where we lost the importance and understanding as a region that transportation and the multimodal transportation is one of the strongest assets we have in this region. You heard Mary talk about it. We have everything. We are in the center of the United States. So when you think about the air, the rail, the water, the highway system, we are perfectly located. But giving up 2 decades of realizing the value of that, you're climbing your way back. And so I think with the concerted effort, especially in the last 7 to 8 years, there's been a huge concerted effort, I think, by the whole region and the state to recognize the importance of the multimodal asset that we are. And organizations like Mary's, like mine, even like the UPS, FedEx, all of those things are now working together. And I think that is the future, and it's strong, but it cannot be without collaboration. We're not going to get this terminal built without collaboration of our governmental entities, of our partnerships, of the business community, and most importantly of our airlines. How do we make that happen, and how do we move it forward? It's continuing to work together and recognizing the value. And we got to stop pointing fingers, or we got to start blame. Stop thinking about that and think about how do we move it forward? How can we do it? And that's what I think is changing, and what's going to be successful as we look at this next decade. I think it's going to be really fun and exciting to be in our region this next decade.
And Rhonda did mention UPS, and she did say the F word, by the way. I won't mention what that.
I didn't say the A word.
Okay, I'll take that. I would like to say that as we're developing and growing here in the region, one thing we can't, as government officials out there, one thing we can't overlook is the people here in the St. Louis region. Often we want to go global and skip over the people that are here in St. Louis. And often in our industry, we find that there's a transportation issue to, you might have a hub here, and then you have individuals who have childcare issues. And I think that was on one of the slides. You have individuals who can't get there because they can't get childcare, or you have somebody who may stay 20 blocks away and would normally love to get to your facility, but there's no vein of transportation outside of Uber, Lyft, or a cab which seems to be quite taxing on somebody who may be making $1.35 an hour or whatever the wage is. So I think as we're making progress in developing the byways and all the multimodal aspects, let's put some eyeballs and put some effort into something within the communities that maybe don't have viable transportation.
All right, very good. Well, we've got a couple of minutes here. I'll ask, are there any audience members that might have a question for these panel of experts? If you do hold your hand up, we will take a microphone to you. Any questions? We have one? Okay, down in front.
Thank you for your time and expertise. I'm curious, when you think about the best ideal people to work for you in your different industries in the shared theme or otherwise, short-term, long-term, globally or regionally, what are the key traits, values, skills that you're looking for in your roles here? Can you describe what exactly would be the perfect fit?
Yeah. I think for us at the airport and we're challenging because we're 365 days a year, 24/7. So we are weekends, we are holidays, we are nights. So what we look for when we're hiring is people that understand that, right? People that are committed to a career, not just a job for the next month. And understanding and making sure that they realize that there are so many opportunities, especially in the world I live in, for male and female, right? There are so many opportunities. And getting people to recognize that that doesn't come without a hard work, and that doesn't come without realizing that it's not necessarily a Monday through Friday or a four 10-hour work week. It's a opportunity to think about, what do you want to do in your career path? What do you want to be a part of? And for us, we try to sell that being a part of what's going to be the biggest project in this region in the next decade is exciting. And you can be a part of that. You can tell your kids about that. You can tell your grandkids about that. But we need to see that work ethic. We need for you to understand the hours that we have and the expectation. So we really look for that commitment. We look for someone who's passionate about working in an industry that is challenging, but that can be really rewarding opportunity-wise.
I think we're looking dual phase in UPS, not just initially, because the bulk of our hiring, like I said initially, is manual labor on the front line, dealing with the packages, the cars. So, I mean, it's in the warehouses, they're not air conditioned. We'll call it conditioned air because it is still hot in there. In the wintertime, it's cold. And I think what we're looking for is someone who's definitely going to be diligent to their careers and realize that UPS is not it's a marathon. It is definitely not a sprint. So if you can get in there and maintain your job, do your job and do it well, you'll have a career that's going to outlast anything you can imagine. And then on the other side, as we're organizations that's transitioning into a lot of automation across the organization, you'll find that we're looking for a lot of engineers, tech people, the kids that you see gaming all the time and that I used to laugh at my son and why do you need 13 different consoles? Those are the ones that we're hiring now. Those are the ones that have all the skill set to come in there and manage the database, the board, what all the technology is. Everything's moving across the facilities and across the country. So if you're looking for someone in UPS land, it's going to be technology driven, number one, and then definitely a desire to if you want to stay on the manual side, to work hard and you can get to the career and the figures that you need to have a wonderful lifestyle.
I was just going to quickly mention, I think part of the challenge is if the skills that you need are team building and communication, how are you communicating that to someone who's in high school or they're at St. Louis Community College participating into your program? And one of the things that the barge and the rail industry are doing is, I mentioned how, you have to work holidays and weekends. The other thing that they're saying is, do you play on team sports? Because if you play on team sports, you're part of a team and you're working together. And that's team building and that leadership. And so those are some of the things that they're trying to do a better job of somebody who maybe isn't familiar with the rail or the barge industry. But if you're part of a team and you work well together, that translates to that team that is providing all the services for that train to move in and out. Same thing applies with the technology part. And that's where we're seeing that a lot of these positions in the logistics and the trucking industry, you're having to reskill them because of the automation and the technology integration. And so that's where they need those skills, but maybe when you say the things I just said, they can't relate to it. And that's where they're making a more concerted effort as far as, do you like video games? Do you like gaming? Because that applies to what we need in the logistics and the trucking industry, because we're trying to reskill this industry. And you may not recognize that with the skills that you have, it translates directly to these great high-paying jobs in the transportation industry.
Thank you. Well, we have time for one more question. Anyone else? We've got one right here. Kyle.
I'll talk loud. Hi, my name is Kyle. I'm the program manager for strategic partnership with the University of St. Louis. And I heard you mention that there are needs for entry-level positions within your organization. I'm curious if there are any gaps in the workforce, or some of your professional pathways that require
As far as I'm concerned, there's no gaps at all. The bulk of the leadership in the organization, whether it be here regionally, locally, or even at the corporate office in Atlanta, the bulk of us started off as manual employees at UPS. In fact, I was in transportation long ago, working with Rhonda years ago, and I started off at UPS as a loader here in the Earth City facility. I quit every night. I was like, this is it's like, I thought that this was ridiculous. You know, my parents had sent me to school. You know, you get all your pedigree, the degrees, and here you are loading boxes. But I think what happens is that leads you to have some sort of commonship or kinsmanship with the people when they come in. And the new hires, I tell everyone that these boxes are not good for manicures. They suck the moisture out of every hand, and it's gonna suck. I mean, but at the same time, if you put forth the effort, and UPS is a place where the loader on the front. In fact, a few years ago, our previous CEO was a loader in Greenwood, Mississippi. So when you can take a platform where you can become a manual loader in a hub in Midwest and work your way to CEO, there are no gaps. And we will pay for education too. So if you're a student at St. Louis Community College, we do tuition reimbursement. So come on down to UPS and get a job.
I would say the same thing. I don't really see gaps. I mean, I started out right out of college on the ground up, right? I started in an entry-level position. In 15 years, I became the vice president for North American Airports for TWA. Had the largest department for TWA, 8,000 employees, running 101 airports. I retired from that industry after 27 years and came over to this side. Never once did I see that I didn't have an opportunity. Never once did I see that I wouldn't be considered because I was a female or because I didn't work hard enough. I mean, I never saw those gaps. So I think making sure that people see that things are not going to come to you just because you have a name or because, you know, you think you deserve it. They're going to come to you because of the work ethic that you have. And if you want to get somewhere in a corporation, there's opportunity, but you have to seek it and you have to make sure that you're earning your way. And I think if there's one mistake that a lot of people make, and I have 3 children, so I've drummed this into their brain, is that you can't expect anything, right? You have to earn it. You have to work your way up. You have to earn your way, but the opportunities are there in any corporation, I think. It's just a matter of making sure that you seek out what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses, how can I better in those? And corporations want good people, right? You want good people. There's always going to be people that want to stay in the labor jobs. That's great. We need those people. There's always people, I think the slide said a while ago, 6% want to get into leadership positions? It's pretty small. That's a little scary number. So I think there's opportunity within every corporation for the level that you want to be. And if the level you want to be is here on the bottom, just doing the day-to-day work, or whether it's here at the top, running a corporation, that opportunity's there. There's not a gap, I don't think.
I was just going to mention maybe the rail and the barge industry listened to the Gen X conversation before. And that is they're recognizing that some of the young people are not interested in going to school maybe right away. And maybe that's why they're basically saying, I am hiring right out of school. I'm hiring individuals with a 2-year degree. Once they get them in the door, then that's where they're going to work with them, do the on-the-job training, but also let them know this is a great career. You're enjoying this, and there's opportunities to advance up. Now we're going to pay and help pay for your school and this additional training. So I think that's where they've switched the model up where they're hiring directly out of high school, but then they're going overboard as far as building those relationships, introducing them to the career and supporting them, and then also making these other levels of education available. And that's where in the barge industry, you can start out as a mate to a deckhand and then get trained to become a tugboat operator.
All right, thank you, audience, and thank you, panelists. Before we wrap up, anything else any of you would like to add?
We all have jobs open. Maybe Ron doesn't, I don't know.
Let me, can we give them a round of applause for the great job they're doing? So again, thank you for I know you're so busy. We appreciate your time and being here today. Thanks, Dr. Bradis, for your presentation on Gen Z. That explains some things for one Gen Zer I still have on the payroll at home. I want to thank all of our partners and supporters and sponsors as well, again, for their support and their great job. Also like to thank the St. Louis Community College staff that worked so hard to plan this event. These events are hard. I know here I am running over time, but I really appreciate the work that they did in getting and pulling this together. One quick more commercial on the college. We're up 15% in enrollment for fall semester. So we're really excited about that. We're hoping we're bringing workers and future employees to all of you and all the panelists that are here. So again, be sure to download the full report. If you go to our website, you can easily find that, and pick up and take a look at this week's Business Journal, and pick up a copy of the Business Journal wrap that we have available for you before you leave today. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.